So, hi everyone. I'm here with Jonny Drechsler today, who's the head of business development for Recordsure, and Recordsure a contact and document compliance and analytics company, really for a lot of regulated industries. So, Jonny, thanks very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, great to be here. Good to see you.
So obviously you guys spend a lot of time, so I suppose, with speech analytics, document analytics, those kind of things. And it'd be good to sort of start off just listening around, I suppose, how you've seen that evolve over the last sort of 5-10 years or so, because it's been a sort of burgeoning kind of market, really.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, I think the reality is that some form of contact center and document analytics has been around for 20 or 30 years to some degree, and it started really with the kind of the birth of kind of large contact center environments where you wanted to get a better sense of what's going on across the space, rather than randomly just dipping into the occasional conversation as sort of indicative of what's going on in the wider business. And so really it's been about the growth of a lot of sort of transcription technologies that allow you to then assess what is being said within that contact center environment, and being able to look at larger data sets to help you understand key trends and issues. And I guess historically what we've seen utilized is kind of transcription and kind of keyword searching type technologies in that contact center environment, where you're kind of going, have they mentioned a certain product? Has a specific risk word been said, or is a specific sort of angry word been said by a customer? But the reality then of those tool sets is they're quite unreliable, I guess, right? So they provide some insight. You can get some good word clouds that show you what your customers are sort of talking about the most and which words and phrases are appearing most often. But from a compliance perspective in particular, they can be quite rife with false positives, and they can be quite hard to configure, because in a regulated environment, it's complex conversations, and the quality assurance that you're doing is quite complex. And so just looking for the word guarantee can be a little bit misleading if there's lots of not guarantees that's being said alongside it, for example. And so the real evolution has come with AI and machine learning, right? The third technology or industrial revolution that we've all seen, and being able to move beyond poor transcription and keyword analysis to really assessing the context of conversations, how things are said, how they've been responded to, and being able to do a much more sophisticated assessment of what's going on. And Recordsure ultimately has built that to solve for the problem of doing small sample assessments of what's going on in a business, in the hope that you're going to find a needle in a haystack, as well as a more systemic issue. And it's in the ability to say, we can now do human levels of assessment with machines across 100% of your data to really point you at the highest risk interaction, right? That trend analysis ultimately.
I remember back to the early days of call recording, and we were just sort of blown away the fact that if you had a dispute on a call, you could actually hear the call back to actually resolve the dispute. And just think about how far that's come these days to, you say, just sort of like transcription, and now to almost like interpretation, I think, is sort of where we seem to be getting now.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, and you can't underplay the value of just recording. I mean, a lot then of what Recordsure has extended into is the ability to capture other channels. Because just having an authoritative record is a much better position to be in than in a he said versus she said type environment. And then if you can build analytics across all channels and start to link data, it becomes a really kind of end-to-end view of your business and the customer journey.
And we were chatting a little bit before around, I suppose, contextual understanding of the conversation, and even in terms of, like, I suppose, real time versus almost like near real time, and having to sort of get to the end of the conversation to be able to have the context of coming back. I mean, how much of an evolution is there around that in terms of the importance of it?
Yeah, so it's the real time outcome is I think the nirvana for this space. So it's the next leap that we're going to make in this space. It's the ability to say, as the call is going on, really accurately, something has gone off course,
Yeah.
or the customer is not understanding what you are saying to them, or you haven't followed the process in the way that we would expect to. And we're starting to eke into that world. We're starting to get there, but there's still a ways to go, because to your point, really what your analytics model needs to be able to do is to understand the context of the conversation to assess whether you've done and said the right thing, because everyone's ambition now is to not live in a very structured and scripted environment, because it's just a poor customer experience. You want to be able to be a bit more agile, especially in more sophisticated areas like mortgages and wealth management and pensions, where it's kind of an advised sales process, right? So you where we're at currently is that within a near real-time context, if you give the conversation a chance to run its course, you can then do extremely accurate assessments of that conversation. In real time, you're sort of taking 30-second bursts of audio data and transcribing and assessing it in that small snippet of data that you have, which means you're limited in the way that you can flag a real-time prompt or intervention. And so what it's good at, I would suggest, is saying things like, just slow down. You're speaking over your customer, and or tonally there's a suggestion of dissatisfaction going on here. What it's going to struggle with is to really assess things like vulnerability, right, which have a lot of kind of parameters that sit around them to determine whether a customer is distressed or in financial difficulty. You need more of the conversation to assess that stuff.
It might be multiple sentences within a paragraph that then are determine whether actually they're vulnerable or not.
It might be multiple data points in a 1 hour conversation, that over the course of an hour you're able to assess a specific risk point, but on their own they mean very little. And so again, the real time can be useful, or it could prompt a supervisor to kind of go, you might want to dial into this because there's some indication that this could go in the wrong direction, or a customer could be unsatisfied. But from a real sort of conduct and automated assurance perspective, it's still a very long way from being able to say, we're going to assess this and give you comfort that the conversation, all the things that needed to happen in this conversation did. And so that's the journey we're on at the minute, from near real time into starting to look at real time as a potential sort of assurance tool ultimately.
And do you think like things like vulnerability, and also like flags for vulnerability, and using, I suppose, what's being said or what's being documented to sort of flag potential vulnerability, I suppose, is where we'll get to?
100%. I mean, it's probably one of the first 3 things any bank or building society or insurance company is asking for at the minute, because it's such a hot topic. The economic environment is only going to drive more vulnerable customers, specifically around financial hardship and difficulty in the current environment, and it is such a focal point for the regulator. So everyone is looking at how can you better assess and determine that stuff. And there's some elements of vulnerability that are more straightforward to assess, and there are some that are much more subjective, and they're much less overt, because people don't want to openly discuss their vulnerabilities in certain instances, right? And so again, being able to assess the entire context of a conversation to make those assessments is a lot easier. And machine learning, of course, learns through just feeding it examples of data and saying this is what vulnerability looks and sounds like in a different instance, and then it can identify that moving forwards. And so the more of that data you're able to feed in and start to train machines and models on, the better they will get at being able to kind of identify that stuff. What we see most effective in that space is to say, let's help you ensure that when you do have a vulnerable customer, you are following due process and you are doing the right things by that customer within your given environment or framework. And then over time, what you will be able to better do as you train on that data is to identify vulnerability further upstream. But again, long way from being able to kind of do that at a level of confidence that is going to kind of give a bank real assurance that, you know, that is the platform to find vulnerable customers with.
And what about the issue, I suppose, of you've got false positives, but I suppose more concerning, particularly in the vulnerable or the financially vulnerable space, is false negatives as well. So you sort of like, you know, you're falsely like determining that they're not vulnerable or they're not that they're not in financial difficulties when in fact they are. I mean, what's the best kind of approach for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, on it for exactly the reasons that we've just discussed, this type of tooling shouldn't be used as a silver bullet, right? This is not the platform to identify all of your vulnerable customers.
Yeah.
It is a platform to give you a better chance of spotting potentially vulnerable customers. So it's about providing indicators rather than assessments that the outcome being delivered is the right one. So really, it's about augmenting your human processes. It's about leveraging the tool to do the assessment where it can be relied upon. But it's more than about augmenting humans to say, if you're going to point your humans at anything, point them here, because there's an indication of risk, and we're going to show you the part of the conversation that's indicating that risk to go and manually review, rather than this type of tooling being used to determine a suitable outcome because it understands enough about the call to be able to do that.
So it becomes like almost like the indicators to help guide the conversation rather than the automated flying of the conversation, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of both, right? I mean, there's kind of more everyday stuff, you know, the right disclosure's been read out in the right context, as the customer responded in the way we wanted it to or them to, and then there's the more subjective elements of it that are just informed. And it's about just moving the bar forward, really, because what do you do at the minute? You probably have a random sampling approach, and there's probably something that's informing that. You split it across all your advisors, you focus a bit more on the newer advisors. There's certain parameters that will drive what falls into the sample. But we're just giving you a much more informed risk-based sample because we're doing 100% assessment of all your conversations and building an automated rule framework to say, if this, then, you know, higher risk, first human should go and look.
Yeah, so it becomes part of your risk-weighted assessment in terms of where to look first, right? Yeah, and one of the big themes has been over the last few years has all been almost like this end-to-end customer journey kind of monitoring as well, which has always been a bit problematic in terms of particularly the old days of call recording. You had to go back and find all of the calls and all the linkages and those kind of things. And I suppose that kind of links in terms of, you know, the analytics or the contact analytics in terms of like that's all context as well, because the context might not be just be in the next sentence or even the next paragraph, even the same conversation.
Yeah,
it could be related to what happened, you know, in a previous conversation, I would think.
100%. So look at those more complex regulated journeys, in particular mortgages, pensions, wealth management, debt collection is another great example of that, where there are multiple customer touch points before either a recommendation is made or a sale is complete or a resolution is achieved. Complaints is another good example of that, right? And so before you even start stitching that data together, just being able to ingest the data but supplement it with the metadata that allows you to search and navigate your records more effectively is a huge benefit for our clients, right? Because at the minute, they delve into kind of often quite old or legacy contact center platforms, and they can't even find the call or the type of call that they wanted to go in and do that human review on in the first place. So they just waste a lot of time looking for information. And what we're able to do is to kind of pull out the calls, the metadata, supplement it with data from other line of business systems, because maybe you don't have the customer reference number or the call type in your contact center platform, but you do have it in your CRM platform.
Yeah.
And then we're also able to use our analytics to assess calls and go, what type of call was this? What personal details sit within this call, so we can quickly identify who the customer was, all that type of stuff. And just being able to do that drives a lot of insight and efficiency, because you've just got more data about your calls before you even get to the clever analytics. And then once you're able to do that with your calls, you're able to kind of supplement that with other channels, right? So in a COVID environment, video conferencing has shot up, right? So everyone's on Teams, they're on Zoom, they're on WebEx. Let's make sure we can do the same thing with the audio from those channels. We actually do a lot of face-to-face recording in branch and field environments that we're able to also then bake into the customer journey. Then you've got things like chat and IM. And again, what Recordsure is focused on doing is being able to say, it doesn't matter the channel. We either record it where it's not or ingest it where it is, and then we'll unify all of that data in a single umbrella, in a single repository. Because of the way that we ingest and analyze that data, we can understand who is the customer, all an advisor's certain calls, all a team's certain calls, and then you can look at assessing different groups of calls. But to your point now, I can look at a customer journey over the course of a collections and recoveries process that took 9 or 10 months, or a mortgage sale that took 3 interactions over 6 weeks to complete, and link that data and then say, I'm not just going to assess the individual interaction really quickly so that I can go and intervene on that risk point that I've seen, but I can assess the entire customer journey to see, did we do all the things that we should be doing as optimally as we should be doing them, and is there any sort of journey or process interventions we might want to make, because we're seeing a lot of regular challenge around the way that a certain process is being run by an individual, if you want to do targeted feedback to an individual, or across like an entire department, right?
Yeah, and I suppose it's so the hindsight's always 2020, isn't it? I mean, that's what we used to say. It's like, so you look at something that's gone wrong here, but then it's like, well, what was the genesis of that happened 6 months ago? And it might actually be that it didn't look right. Everything looked fine until that point, but now you actually find, well, actually, it was the thing that 6 months ago that's what had happened, and then you need to pull out. How many of those other events happened across the rest of the base to then go back and see if you can actually prevent something happening?
Exactly.
Like you go back to then go forward, sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And what about omnichannel? You talked a bit about different types of channels that are sort of developing. We're sort of gradually getting into this omnichannel world, especially with COVID. I mean, chat's now more popular. You say we're all on Teams now. I mean, how does that impact, I suppose, what would have been speech analytics is now, so it seems like that's becoming contact analytics, but it has to all be knitted together. And is that tricky or?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's getting easier because the world and banks think about an ecosystem rather than a platform now, right? So they are either updating or purchasing platforms that should be easy to integrate into API and to suck information out of and push somewhere else. And therefore it becomes easier for us to kind of unify data sets. Then when you get to the analytics, it's quite interesting, because the way that I speak to you in a video conference or in person is even quite different to the way that I speak to you on the phone, because there's something, I can see you nodding and understanding what I'm saying, or I can see you kind of, your face is completely uninterested in what I'm saying, versus on a phone, you get a lot more sort of vocal sort of check-ins and assessment. And then on chat, you kind of go even more shorthand, but you don't have the challenge with voice is always, can I get an accurate transcript? Because a lot of my analytics is going to come off the words and the language that was said. Whereas with chat, you don't have the worry of is the transcription accurate? Because people have written what they say to. The communication style just differs a little bit. So the voice analytics models that we have are slightly adapted, but very versatile, to whether it's face-to-face, video, telephony, or chat, to be able to thematically assess the topics and themes that are being discussed, and then allow you to build the rules that kind of go, did the process occur in the way that we wanted it to, or is there any kind of language that gives us cause for concern? And then, as you say, any customer journey, really, it's not just about voice, it's not just about chat. You've then got email, you've then got documentation, you've then got sort of the customer case file that sits alongside it. And so what we've developed as these ecosystems have developed is, okay, we've actually tackled voice, which is probably the hardest bit to do because it's the most unstructured data. How can we point those models at chat and IM and sort of instant messenger? And then we've built a complementary product, which is all about document analytics, which uses some of the smarts from voice, but is actually about just assessing document types, information within the documents, and allowing you to build similar types of rule sets. But it can also suck in emails, attachments to emails, and all the bits that sit around that customer sales process to then give you that, as you say, omni-channel, doesn't matter what formatted it's in or where it's come from, we can do the same assessment on it across that customer journey.
I mean, I think the pandemic's been quite interesting because there's definitely been a push towards digital, and so chat, as an example, is become quite popular. But it's there's definitely always been a bit of a bias to say, well, look, we need to talk with someone, right? So and we're now getting away from that a little bit, saying, well, actually, I want to do stuff on stuff on email. I want to do stuff on chat. But I think you're right in terms of like the way we interact with the channel will actually change the outcome as well. I mean, do you think that the models have to be, how much do you think different do you think the models have to be? And what can you, so there's what's written, and there's also what's not written as well. And then there's non-verbal kind of communication as well that also happens.
Yeah, so I mean, there is some nuance to it, right? So again, an email isn't a conversation, right? An email is an explicit sort of instruction or a desire. It's not a back and forward that you can kind of assess in the moment. I mean, it becomes that over time, but it's not what that is there to do. Chat is live, and it's kind of a bit more, you get a bit more of the sense of where the person is at and what their motivation is and what outcome they're seeking to achieve as a whole. And then those other channels, you're actually just getting more and more information as you move towards those kind of voice and video and face-to-face channels. And so the level of assessment you're able to do becomes a bit more sophisticated. So in all of them, you can assess the language, what was said and done, and what was explicitly said, really. As you move into more chat and then vocal interactions, you can start to look at things like tone and pace and what was the intonation when they said this word. But even in those channels, you're somewhat limited. When you get into tonal analysis, it's a really gray area, right? You can probably say, is that person having a positive or negative experience? But actually, there's some really interesting research around whether you're really, really excited or really, really angry, for example. Tonally, if you took the language out of it, the indicators are quite similar. So being overlaying that onto language can help you understand things like dissatisfaction and sort of engagement. But there's still more false positives associated with that versus just assessing the language. What exactly was said? Where was it said, and how was it said in the conversation? And again, from a compliance and assurance perspective in particular, that is what you want to focus on. And then you can move more into kind of customer experience and sales training by supplementing some of those other data sets.
Yeah, I suppose you got the written stuff that you can sort of rely on and sort of it's documented, right? And that's good from a compliance point of view. And then you've got the non-verbal stuff there's actually quite a lot of information there. I mean, do you think it's going to go that direction? I mean, we're chatting on a video call. I'm thinking actually, if you even meet in person, think about some of like micro expressions people have, and this is how we're not even aware of it, but it is how humans interact, right? And some of those things we might not be aware of. But do you think we'll eventually evolve there? For video calls and live calls, I suppose.
So what Recordsure is really focused on is the voice, right? What is being said in the conversation, and how there's people doing some really cool stuff around micro expressions and tells, and using that in kind of fraud environments, and being able to, is someone lying? Are they telling the truth? Are they happy? Are they sad? We can do that with the language. You can do that with the tone to some degree, and you can do that with kind of video assessment and picture assessment of some people's facial features as well. So it's all there, and I think ultimately it will all operate in a single ecosystem where you turn on all the bits you want for any given type of sort of assessment. And there's someone focusing on every aspect of the customer journey from that perspective. Absolutely.
I suppose we have to wind ourselves back from like the year 2030 now.
Well, but it's all all directionally. There's some really kind of clever stuff going on around all aspects of that customer interaction.
But even I suppose what we have today, I suppose, which is text analytics, voice analytics, those kind of things. Do you think how should we think about the right context of the right channel at the right time versus when you need that extra information? So if you're talking with a human, you can actually get some of that information, and it's useful in terms of the outcomes, right? Or in terms of the sales or the compliance, those kind of things. But in other areas, it's probably not important, and chat's okay.
100%. I mean, all the general insurers want to push as many people as digital as possible, right? It's kind of it's a bit more transactional. It's a little less advice based, and their cost model benefits much better from digital interactions. But and that's again a big part of the journey that we help people with, right? If people are calling into your contact center with queries that could be solved online, let's help you identify those at scale and understand what you can do to signpost those digital channels more effectively to people. But again, the reality becomes, especially in financial services, especially when it comes to kind of the more complex end of it, mortgages, pension, insurance, I would argue as well, debt collection, in particular from a bank's perspective, people want to hear from an expert. They want comfort that they're doing the right thing, and an automated chatbot that sometimes gives you weird answers or unhelpful answers to the question that you're posing doesn't do that for me when I'm about to invest in a mortgage, which is probably the biggest investment I'll make in my life. I want human assurance that I'm doing and saying the right thing. So a lot of banks call it moments of truth or key customer interaction points, where the human contact will never come out of the equation, I don't think, or we're a long way from that being the case. And then it's just about understanding what your customers want, where they sit in different sort of journeys, and how you offer them the best platform to be able to do that. And then again, you learn a lot from your human interactions about what customers really want and what questions they ask and what response gives them the best outcome. So you're able to, again, utilize that data once it's digitized to inform, well, what should my chatbot look and feel like? Because this is what people are asking in the contact center. And if I want them to have that question answered digitally, I need to be able to replicate that kind of Q&A environment, right? And so one informs the other and allows you to kind of get to that digital strategy or that kind of channel transformation strategy more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, I do like the idea of almost like, how do you assess a customer journey and make sure every single point along the customer journey you can assess, right? Well, actually, you do need to speak to someone now because there's information here that we don't have or that you need to get just really to make sure, right? So you have to make sure that that's the right thing, because even from a text point, we might not be sure up till now, but
exactly.
but the but these other journeys, I mean, they can just go through automatically. I mean, it's just a query, just go through and don't push them to a person.
Exactly, and it's the bank having a regulatory obligation to push the customer to a human interaction because they don't have the right information, or they need to have some level of engagement to ensure they're doing the right thing. And then it's giving the customer the option to talk to someone because they're feeling uncomfortable or out of their depth, or they're not getting the answer that they want. And that's the balancing act that everyone needs to tread the line of at the minute, because everyone is trying to drive digital. Everyone expects younger and younger generations to want a digital and fast and quick experience, but that doesn't mean it's the best experience, right? In every scenario.
Well, Jonny, it's super interesting. I think it's clearly it's a technology that's sort of evolving, and you just think about call recordings become standard. Speech analytics is quickly becoming pretty much a standard certainly in call centers. You just wonder if this sort of like analytics stuff is as well. In sort of 2-3 years time, I would think so. It's fascinating, it really is.
Oh yeah, look, thank you. I mean, we're having a great time building it and delivering it. I mean, I think in the last few years it has become more of the norm. So some of the largest banks in the UK and insurance companies use this wall to wall across their contact center and branch environment to do their conduct assessment. And now even the regulator is able to sit up and say, the technology is out there to assess 100% of your customer interactions, and it's affordable, so you don't really have an excuse not to do it. So they're not mandating it, but if you're in hot water or there's suggestions of mis-selling or bad customer practice, they're very quickly going to start asking why you're not using this type of technology. And that's where you really see the kind of the mindset change within the industry and the organization, and where it's all going.
Yeah. Well, Jonny, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. It's been great to chat with you. It's exciting stuff.
No, likewise. Appreciate it, Chris. Great chat. Thank you.
Thanks, John.